people who aren't here or people who
Yeah,
want to hear it again?
totally. That's totally
Okay,
fine.
perfect. Well, Megan, my friend who I've known for many, many years, I appreciate you being here and volunteering to come and speak today to us. I'd love for you to just briefly introduce yourself, and then let's get into this topic about the mansion tax. I'd also like for you to touch on why it's so important for us to donate money so that they can, we can have support as realtors. And then if we have any time and we can do a quick Q&A if you are open to it, I'd love to
Of
do a
course.
quick Q&A as well.
You know I'm a fast talker. I'm like, and I had my espresso, so I'm ready to go. So everyone that doesn't know me, my name is Megan O'Brien. I'm a realtor with KW Prosperity in Wayne, and I'm also a director at Greater Bergen Realtors. So this has been, I'm sure a lot of you have heard what's going on in New Jersey. It has been like a wild couple of days of just like a lot of big changes. I think I can speak for all of us that we've had a lot of big changes in the industry this last year, and I think we're all a little tired. So I want to go over the history of the realty transfer tax and the mansion tax. I think it'll help everyone understand like where it started and where we're at now. So what is a realty transfer tax? So it was established in 1968 to offset the cost of recording the deed. So I think we can imagine in 1968, things were a little bit more difficult with the lack of technology. So that is when they instituted the first realty transfer tax. So it is calculated through a sliding scale. So for example, a $200,000 sale to $550,000 sale is $4.80 per $500. And since it's a sliding scale, it goes up. So for example, a $550,000 to $850,000 sale is $5.30 per $500. So I'm not great at math, so I go to njrealtors.com. There is a realty transfer tax calculator. So whenever I do my seller net sheet, I just go to that calculator because again, each offer is going to be a different price. And I usually use that calculator to kind of offset that. So that is the realty transfer tax. You cannot avoid it unless it's a private sale, I think under $100. So every seller has been paying that for all eternity. What we're hearing a lot about is the mansion tax. So that is a supplemental fee on top of the realty transfer tax. But the mansion tax was often known for being paid by the buyer. So if you had a buyer looking at a $900,000 to a $1.1 million budget, you just have to say to them, hey, listen, that's great. I'm excited to help you. And just so you know, if you are purchasing a home that ends up being over $1 million, there is a 1% tax you have to pay, right? And we call it the mansion tax. And that is why you would very often see homes selling for $999,999, right? That was done in part to avoid the mansion tax. So it was always paid by the buyer. So fast forward all this time, I think that was done in 2004, and that's how it's always been. So earlier this year, in about, I think February and March, that is when the governor does his budget proposal. So Governor Murphy, in his budget proposal, had a whole section on the supplemental fee, so the mansion tax, for lack of a better term. So his suggestions in that budget was that there would be an increase from 1% to 2% on all homes and commercial transactions that sold from 1 million to 2 million. So basically doubling that. And then tripling from 1% to 3% on homes and buildings that sold for over 2 million. And this was still paid for by the buyer. So I'm sure all of you that are in New Jersey know we had like huge call to action. A lot of us were posting about it on social and really expressing how detrimental this would be to the buyer. We already have extremely high prices, very high interest rates, very low inventory, that to add on even more of a burden to buyers would be really challenging. And we also knew this would stifle inventory, right? So if you're a seller and you own an $800,000 house and maybe you have a couple of kids or it's too small or you want to change school districts and you're looking to move up, it is very likely that for you to move up, you're going to be in that $1 million price point. So now if you're facing a 2%, tax on top of all the other expenses, that seller might either suck it up and stay, or they might renovate their house or maybe even leave the state, right? So we knew this would have a really big consequence on our inventory shortage as is. So NJ Realtors did a huge call to action. We let our voices be heard. We do not think this is a great way to handle this. I just want to go over really quickly just how that legislative process works in New Jersey. So as I mentioned, the governor shares that budget proposal in the spring, right? And it goes through a legislative review process. So in that process, the budget committees in both the Assembly and the Senate review the proposal, and they have public hearings. So in these public hearings, state departments can advocate, advocacy groups like NJ Realtors would talk, and the public. And that's where they get to express like their happiness or their unhappiness with the bill and talking about that. So if you guys don't really know the New Jersey Realtors team, we're so lucky to have them. They are a really sharp group of people. They're there talking in front of the State House, in front of all our legislators about all these issues. On Friday, when the budget proposal was going through the committees, they were there, I think, until 1 a.m. They work their butts off, and they were expressing just how detrimental this can be. So what actually came out of that committee review process was, I don't know if any of us were like necessarily prepared for like the 180 that it went through. So what actually passed and what is now officially in effect is that the mansion tax has shifted from a buyer responsibility to the seller responsibility. So the buyer is no longer paying that tax. It is now the seller paying that tax. What also changed is the percentages. So for $1 million to $2 million, that tax remains at 1%, but it is paid for by the seller. $2 million to $2.5 million, it is at 2%, again, paid by the seller. From 2.5 to 3, it is 2.5%. From 3 to 3.5, it is 3%. And 3.5 and up, it's 3.5%. So we're talking like at a $3.5 million sale, that's $122,500. That is a tax that is going to the state to record the deed. It's a lot of money. I think, a lot of us are happy that the burden isn't on the buyer, right? But we could be happy with that and also be very unhappy with actually what transpired. So it is no longer a buyer responsibility. It is shifting to the sellers, and it is a pretty hefty tax. I think we all know once the tax is on, usually never goes away. So we can pretty much buckle up and just say this is going to be our new norm. I think this is still going to very much hurt the housing market. And I think something that kind of is getting me the most fired up about all of this is I think what's being missed so much about this whole process is that housing related activities in the United States is 19% of the GDP. We are a very large part of the economy, right? But to scale that on a New Jersey level, a home sale in New Jersey generates $202,000 in economic activity and usually creates 3.5 jobs. So we're talking about a home sale process generating money and generating jobs, which is good for New Jersey economy. It's good for local businesses. It's good for everything, right? I have a listing coming on. We're doing power washing. We're doing cleaning. We're doing photos. You're talking about generating so much business by doing real estate. And I think it's just a very big letdown that we are levying a tax for no other reason than we need money. And my understanding is the budget isn't even balanced and it's not even going to generate enough money to cover all the spending that's in it. And I just think it's very difficult to be in a high tax state and have even more tax. And I want this to be very clear. This is in addition to the regular realty transfer tax. It's so you're having that basically that other tax, which is, a couple dollars per 500 on top of the supplemental fee. So it's going to be a hefty amount. I think this is going to be, a very big pushback on the agents that work in the luxury area. And I think it's going to discourage people moving or selling in New Jersey. And I just think overall, it's not great. But to touch on why RPAC matters. So RPAC is essentially our union, for a lack of a better term, right? So they're here to keep their eyes on all these things that are happening. Way before we even know about it, they know about it. And they're able to disseminate the information down to us. Why investing in RPAC matters is we need to build RPAC before we need it, right? So let's say the bank account was empty, no one's investing in RPAC, and then something like this comes up in the budget, we would have no money to do the call to action, to mobilize and to get the word out. So we have to always be investing in RPAC so that when something like this happens, we can just get straight to action and we're not looking around scrambling for money. There's been so many things that RPAC advocates for, but this is a great example of having this call to action, being able to express to homeowners why this is a problem, and then have that team in Trenton sit there and really go toe to toe with these people about why their ideas are actually terrible and how they don't really understand how our industry works. So the new taxes are going to go into effect on contracts that were signed after July 10th. So if you're currently under contract and you have a fully executed contract before July 10th, nothing is changing. So any contract that is fully executed after that July 10th date will fall into the new tax, which I think also we're not thrilled about because it's not that much of a heads up. So if you have your home on the market, and you put it on, a couple days ago and you're in that luxury price point, I think we're going to be in big trouble on how that's going to impact them. And I also want to just make one last note. In Bergen County, the average sales price every single month this year has been over $1 million. When we look at last year, 4 out of the 12 months, the average sales price was $1 million. And most of the months this year has been 1.1 million. So this is basically impacting the average home in Bergen County. It's not like a mansion is, far away. $1 million home now in a lot of towns is kind of as sickening as it is to say is entry level. So this is very much going to impact our local market. Yeah, that's really all I got there. This is kind of the rundown on it.
So if you guys have questions, raise your hand. Megan, so what I hear you saying is for those of us that have luxury listings, a million plus, we need to sit down and have a come to Jesus meeting with our sellers about, if we're not under contract, about repositioning the home and getting it under contract by July 10th, executed contract. That's number one. Number two, my question would be, is there any scripting around the conversations we need to have with our sellers to really help educate them on what this is going to look like come July 11th? And if so, can you share that with me? Or if you don't have anything, when you get it, can you share it with me?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest piece is, and I'll just speak out of my experience, is I texted every single person that is in my sphere about this before it changed, right? I said, hey, listen, it's already so expensive to live in New Jersey. Like, if you could have a few minutes to do this, would you mind? So I think also like being advocates before these things happen is really important, right? And I'm saying this with all the love of my heart and zero judgment. I saw so many people post about it after it happened, and none of that same energy was done before this passed, right? So we have to stop being news reporters as realtors, and we have to be advocates. Do this before it's too late. So in your case, David, your example is, if we were doing our job of advocating for our clients, they would have already known about this before it was passed, and we would have already had that conversation. And obviously we didn't know the final outcome of this, but I think it's getting ahead of that and positioning yourself as the expert, that now when you're going to your seller, like, well, now you're going to have to pay this 2% tax. The way I look at it as, and not speaking in any particular terms of compensation because it's negotiable, I think we can kind of say like, hey, you're paying a lot of money for no representation, no work to the state. I'm going to be your advocate. I'm going to be paying for the market. And you're going to talk about all the things that you're doing, right? You're paying that amount to the state for no reason, right? They should have no problem paying that amount, if not more, to you to be advocating and marketing and selling their home. So I think it's all about how you look at it. And I think, as always, it's what your seller nets. And if you can sit down and go through these numbers with them and get their payoff and advocate for them and show them the math, I think they'll have a better feeling of what they're netting and not so much focusing on the expenses. We always talk about what you net. It's not, it's about what you net, not what you're spending. And I think that's going to be a big piece of the conversation.
I love that. And we have to be able to have a conversation with our seller, because a confused buyer never buys. And if we can't walk them through this and explain it, we are not going to get the business. So thank you, Megan.
And I texted my clients that are in that $1 million price point. I was like, hey, great news. You don't have to pay that 1% anymore. So, there are pros and cons to it. And I think just always keeping your eye on these legislative changes gives you a great reason to reach out to your database. Doesn't always mean you're going to have great information or happy news, right? In this case, for buyers, it's great news. For sellers, it's terrible news. So I think it's just always being mindful of like, what value can we add to our people and how can we position ourselves as the expert? And I urge all of you, like, stop being reporters, be advocates. It does no good for everyone to talk about what happened when it's done instead of talking about what we can do to prevent it. And I think that's like my soapbox irritation of what I saw this weekend. I was like, well, where was all this energy before? Did you sign the call to action before? Did you call your luxury sellers and buyers before? Or are you just reacting to it now? So that's something I feel pretty strongly about, if you couldn't tell.
Well, we can tell. Ira, you're up.
So even though it's contracts that are fully executed and ready to go before July 10th, I have a closing July 21st. It shifts from the buyer to the seller no matter what. So now my sellers will have to pay $18,000.
So I'm going to be on a broker briefing from Yulia for NJ Realtors at 10. I'm not 100% sure, because I think as long as the contract is fully executed before July 10th, the buyer should still be responsible. we'll have a fuller picture like from a legal standpoint. Because initially I heard IRA that like it had to be closed by July 10th, but then if I read the bill and it basically said it won't apply to contracts signed before July 10th. So your seller might be fine. We'll definitely update you once we hear from like our counsel from the state. But that's the only downside is like I'm 99% sure, but I'm not the lawyer. So I'll definitely let you know. The broker briefing I think is at 10. So that'll be a clearer picture.
Yeah, and if you can share it with me, I'll post it on the Morning Mindset chat so everybody can follow up and know about it. Thank you. I got Ariane and Tanae had her hand up too. Ariane, you're up.
So out of curiosity, as listing and or buyer agents, what should we look for as a listing agent when looking at offers? And as a buyer's agent, how can we structure offers to make it a little less
confusing?
A little less confusing and not hurt the wallets on either side a little less.
So I'm very passionate about seller net sheets. So prior to SEPA, which changed kind of our buyer agency agreements and it kind of reframed how we look at compensation, I have a spreadsheet for each offer that comes in, right? Because there are going to be certain changes in compensation or there's going to be seller credits, whatever. So I'm focusing my seller clients away from the offer price and looking at what they're netting. So for me, it's a non-negotiable as a listing agent. I need to know what your mortgage payoff is. So when you're looking at multiple offers, now more than ever, you're talking about an offer at, 1.8 versus 2.1. Like there is going to be a pretty big difference in that net. So I strongly recommend building out that spreadsheet, especially if you're in that luxury price point of the realty transfer tax, the supplemental fee, and then compensation and any other term in there, because we're looking at the whole package, not just one line in the agreement. And I would say for buyers, there is an opportunity if a buyer would like to stay competitive. There's nothing preventing that buyer from saying, I will take on that transfer tax, right? I will, they can pay the regular RTF. They don't have to pay the supplemental. They can split the transfer tax. In Delaware, it's 4% and it's customarily split 2%, 2% by the buyer and seller. So I think, if that's a pain point this upcoming few months before we kind of get used to it, I would say as a buyer's agent, looking at maybe reducing that pain point and instead of increasing your offer, maybe taking the expense out, I think could be a creative way to do that. And I think always talk about net. I think net is so important. For far too long, we've been presenting only that top line number and not really getting down to the actual net to the seller. And that's really what matters at the end of the day. And, you have to be mindful and let them know this is only an estimation. There's going to be other things in there, but title companies have great spreadsheets. I just have my own, but there's so many resources you can use to get your seller a full net sheet. So they have a better idea of what they're walking away with.
I love that. Thank you. And Tanae, I'm coming to you next. Quick question for you guys and put yes in the chat. Would you guys want someone to come on here and do a training around preparing a proper net sheet and what that should look like? If you would, put yes in the chat and I'll work on that. Tanae, you're up.
Good morning, David. Good morning, everyone. Megan pretty much hit on what I was going to ask about, which is the pricing strategies. Because I don't know this to be true, but usually, if businesses have to take the brunt of extra costs, they usually pass it on to the consumer, right? So, and a lot of times we know that it's hard to work with sellers to get them the price correctly. And if they know that they're going to have to pay this extra tax, do you feel like they'll try to pass the buck on to the buyer by saying, okay, well, if I have to pay an extra $100,000 in tax, we're going to list the home for $100,000 more, so they can kind of like soften the blow and get their money back in some way. So it's kind of like the buyer's not responsible anymore, but they will kind of be responsible in some way if your sellers aren't, following your instruction with the pricing correctly, just so they can offset that additional tax. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that something we can anticipate?
I think so. And I think that's where just follow the math, right? Like show them because if your home sells for more, you're technically paying more tax too. So I think it all comes down to just doing the numbers and being very confident in that and being able to give them a bunch of different scenarios and kind of take it from there. I personally myself don't do upper luxury. So I'm probably not the best person. I am really looking forward to hearing from the agents in New Jersey who are in those price points and what that looks like, and seeing kind of how it trickles down. I mean, I think the 1 million to 2 million is kind of where a lot of us can safely say is not out of the realm of normalcy to dabble in, just because of the prices in New Jersey. It'll be interesting to see the pricing strategy. And I think too, you know, if the agents aren't doing the proper consultation and doing the math, like the seller might be misguided in the best strategy. So I think, you know, if you're not super confident with the math, like you lean on the title company, you know, you contact NJ Realtors. Like there's so many resources for us that if we're not the expert, there are people that can help us be the expert. And the path is in the math, as Gary Keller says. So it's really important to just follow the numbers. But yeah, I think the pricing strategy is going to come into play. And I think we're going to see buyers that are competitive say, I'll still pay the transfer tax. I think we're going to see that as well in the more competitive listings. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Tanan. Thank you, Megan. Thank you for agreeing to come on here. Every time you come on, you drop a lot of great information. And I just really appreciate your willingness to come on here and share your expertise. Please report back to me, you know, once you have your meeting at 10, and I'll post that on the Morning Mindset chat. If you guys don't know how to access the chat, you can send me a DM or a text, and I'll get you the link to join. So again, Megan, thank you so much for your time. I do want to say this really quickly before I let you guys get out of here. I was having a conversation with Cito, and I want you guys to understand this isn't my call, this is your call. And so it's not about what I want to talk about, it's about what you guys need training on and what you want to hear. And Cito shared with me that she had this transaction going on. There were some things going on with a tenant and the landlord that she wanted some help navigating through. And because she shared that with me, I reached out to one of my push graduates, Lauren, who's in the DR. Lauren did $100,000 a year working with rentals, so she knows the insides and outsides of dealing with rentals and landlords. She's going to be my special guest on Thursday. So I just wanted to prep you guys for that so that you can come with any questions that you have for her. I don't want to say, do you have questions? And there's crickets. We have people on that can answer your questions. Come with a question. And I also just wanted to empower you guys to reach out to me if there's training that you want to know about, things you want to hear about. Let me know. I'll put it together. I want this to be a call that you're getting value from. And so in order to make that happen, I need to know what you guys need to hear. So I appreciate everyone being here. I'm going to go take my dog Charlie to the vet. So I got to get out of here. However, thank you guys so much for being here today. Megan, again, thank you so much for the information. It was really, really helpful. And the last thing I'm going to say, especially to my New Jersey people, I have a save the date for you guys. The afternoon of August 16th. That's my weekend birthday celebration. We're going to be doing the actual book launch and having a book release something Michelle's planning. So I'll make sure that you guys know about it. Save the date. And I appreciate you guys. Brenda's not here, so I'm going to let you guys out with this one little word.